Ladies and gentlemen, friends, it is 2:15 and we now begin with our opening plenary panel. How can the European Green Deal contribute to solving the climate crisis? How can this be impacted by the corona crisis? This opening panel builds on the keynote presentations that you heard before the short break, but we also have two additional panelists. But before we go there, let me remind you and tell those who join us for this second session of a few technical issues. Now, we use for this panel Zoom webinar. If you have questions, please use the question and answer feature in Zoom. You will find that at the bottom of your black screen, your black square, at the bottom towards the right, Q&A. And there you already see a little 3 because there are 3 unanswered questions already in the question and answer function. Please start your questions always with the name of the speaker who you want to respond. That makes it a lot easier to direct them later on, and it means that the panelists who read the questions know what to respond to. If you want to interact with other participants or contribute to the wider discussion, then please use the Zoom chat. You may share links in the chat too. We will not use the chat and the session Q&A function in Wova. We will be using Zoom, the functions on Zoom for this panel. Now, as we go into this discussion, it is a great pleasure to welcome our keynote speakers that you already saw before the break. But in addition, we also have Ester Asin, the director of the WWF European Policy Office, traditionally one of the best connected and most influential environmental advocacy groups in Brussels. The WWF European Policy Office truly covers the waterfront of EU sustainability policies. And we also have Helena Braun. She works for the European Commission. She is part of the team of Franz Timmermans. She is responsible there for Green Deal related policies, which includes the circular economy, biodiversity, chemicals, forest, fish and the ocean, as well as education, youth, culture and sport. It's a wide range and she has the unenviable task of making sense of it all and integrate the knowledge. You've already met before the short break Bruyninckx he is the executive director of the European Environment Agency. That is where all the data and policy knowledge of Europe's environment come together, not only from the EU, but also beyond. And Klaus Töpfer from TMG, it's a think tank, and he's a strong forward thinker, but better known for his various ministerial roles in the German federal government and at the helm of the United Nations Environment Programme. Who better collectively to discuss how to make the best of the EU Green Deal and the other EU instruments we now have to take us out of the pandemic towards sustainability, how to avoid that we build back and instead build forward better. Now, before they speak, I would like to encourage you, as you follow this, not only ask questions in the chat in the question and answer function, but also go and tweet happily away. You have the hashtag Think2030 there. If you use it, then we create a space for discussion also on Twitter. And with that, I would like to go to Ester Asin for the first initial statement. Ester, unmute yourself and we can already see you well. The floor is yours. Ester.
Thank you very much, Andreas and Selina and IEP colleagues for inviting me to be part of this great panel. I'm very humbled also by your words about EPO. Well, the credit goes to the amazing WWF network, which my office is part and my colleagues of science-based organization with people working on conservation, biodiversity, climate and energy, and many others in Europe, but also across the world. This is where our success lies, I would say. I had three quick comments, wishes, as I said, for the beginning, also picking up on what some of the previous speakers said before. The European Green Deal, if we think about when it came to life, I think it was a reaction to what people were asking, what voters indicated in the elections to the European Parliament. And it would be great to see those citizens feeling also the ownership of what's going to be implementing, but also seeing the value. What's the value of this European policy making? And it's been mentioned that it's true, next year the European Commission will open up many opportunities for changes in different regulations on climate policies to really ground the increased 2030 targets into a solid plan. So we believe that it's essential that EU citizens are fully involved in these policy processes, beyond going to vote, beyond taking part in public consultations, or even demonstrating on the streets. We also need dedicated processes, allowing them to contribute to shaping these climate-related policies, because those policies, those choices are going to have fundamental impacts on our lives, on the way we move, how and at which price we are going to heat our homes, or even what we are going to eat. And I'll pick up the example of the European Climate Pact, which is going to be soon launched by the European Commission, and it should be one of these opportunities. And the Commission framed this alternative as a call for individuals and stakeholders to take responsibility and figure it out how to reduce their emissions. But we think that instead, what the European Parliament has proposed in the amendments of the climate law, that the Pact should really engage proactively citizens, social partners, and stakeholders in the elaboration of this union climate policies, and really fostering the dialogue and the diffusion of science-based information about climate change. That takes me to the second wish about the European Green Deal, because in the European Green Deal, we are closer to what the biodiversity, and many of the speakers have mentioned it as well, the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis demand us to do. And it's true that the European Green Deal is more than climate. It also addresses the action needed on biodiversity. But as I mentioned before, we, as a science-based organizations, want to see these policies nested on science. And today, when we talk especially about the 2030 climate targets, we are not seeing that being consistent with science. And again, we acknowledge that the Commission has done a good job and a much needed job to put the increase of the climate targets on the agenda, despite COVID and despite pressures from other fronts as well. But we don't believe that the ones put it forward now are really sufficient to really keep us on this scenario of below 1.5 degrees of global warming. Because we know that the biggest emitters, the historical emitters, the most developed nations will really have to speed up this reduction of emissions by 2040. And the objective in the European Green Deal was to revise the 2030 climate target from 40% to between 50 and 55%, and I quote it, in a responsible way. But it's difficult to argue without evidence that any target above 55% is not reasonable for the economy. And also because we are nearly there. So according to the European Commission own analysis, if we will continue under a business as usual scenario, we might achieve 56% of reduction by 2030. If we add, for instance, the recent coal phase out announcements, we are already close to the 50%. And now we are also talking about adding removal. So we talk about this net zero. So if we remove the net, then the emission reduction is 52%. And this is far away from what the science is telling us that the EU should deliver about 65% of reduction by 2030. And something that is really important, it's been mentioned as well, is that we should also have a target, a separate target for sinks, separate from the emission reduction target. We believe that we have to separate the two, and that should be based on the restoration of natural carbon-rich ecosystems such as forests or wetlands. And I will conclude with my third wish that has also been mentioned by some of the speakers. Please. Very quickly, and I can develop. Whether we are talking about beyond GDP, well-being economy, it's clear that also this COVID is the wake-up call for the transformation of our economy, a radical transformation to a cleaner, to a climate-neutral economy, but also an economy that doesn't fuel more the social inequalities that are already existing, and that we really take the road to this just transition. How we do it, maybe this is something that will come during the conversation, but happy to add more on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esther. That was a perfect 6 minutes with your 3 wishes. And yes, you focused on the Green Deal and how it can shape our future, how it will shape our future in the long run. You stressed that it is not yet ambitious enough in spite of all the money on the table. We are still unclear whether it will deliver the results that we need, and you question what else is needed. What better platform for you, Helena Braun, to respond to from the perspective of the team Timmermans? It's part of your responsibility as a team to coordinate things and to move them forward. Helena.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I can only echo Esther's words in that sense. I also must start with a small apology. Unfortunately, today I could join only right before this session, so unfortunately I missed the introductory speeches, so I still need to catch up. But maybe a few reactions to what Esther said, and also a bit about the Green Deal's contribution to solving the climate crisis, which has been the question also posed to us. When we presented the European Green Deal, well, it was, and it still is, presented as the new growth strategy for the Union to really take comprehensively all the key sectors in our economy and try to put them on a sustainable path, from energy to buildings to food to products. And I think it's extremely important to emphasize this word comprehensive here, because we really need to make sure also in the implementation process now that we cannot abandon one strand of the Green Deal to the other, or lose sight of some, because in order to really reach the climate neutral economy in a sustainable way without doing any harm to other objectives, then we need to tackle them together. And so all these strands beyond energy are absolutely crucial for reaching climate neutral economy as well. It is not sufficient to focus only on energy, and I think also compared to many other parts of the world, that this in a way is a big let's say innovation that the Green Deal brings, that all these different strands of the climate elements, the resource and land use elements, the biodiversity elements, also the pollution elements, that we need to look and tackle them together and not choose solutions with which we may, let's say, solve one part of the problem, but maybe create 10 others. And if we take, for example, the importance of circular economy transition, if we know that almost half of the total greenhouse gases come from resource extraction and processing, then this fundamental change of following not only the energy efficiency principle in our sectorial transitions, but also the resource efficiency, and also bearing in mind the ecosystem considerations, that's absolutely crucial. And of course, the second is to, in addition to this comprehensive approach and or a cross-sectorial approach, it's to acknowledge also that, well, the Green Deal alone, when we talk about solving the climate crisis, if only Europe does it, it is not it is not going to be sufficient. So the climate and environmental diplomacy here is extremely important, and we really try and have to put a lot of attention of ours in convincing the international partners, and also making sure that we do not in any way, let's say, export problems to the other side of other parts of the world. Why, for example, the most concrete and maybe one of the recently the more visible strands where we have also unprecedented public demand and support regards global deforestation, and where we really need to make sure that the products that are sold in the EU market do not contribute to global deforestation. On the point also that that Ester mentioned regarding the just transition, as my boss likes to say, there is no transition if the transition is not just. So the social elements are absolutely fundamental to take into consideration. It cannot be seen as let's say, an elitist program or only a growth and economic program. It really needs to be something that brings people along, and that we are prepared with the skills, we are prepared with the innovation to make people successfully transition. So maybe these just to kick off the discussion, a few comments, and looking forward to continuing the debate.
Andreas, you're on mute.
I am now unmuted. Thank you very much, Helena. That was 4.5 minutes. And I'll follow up with a short question that came through the question and answer function in Zoom from this morning already. The EU Green Deal is still focused on economic growth, but we heard that there are limits to growth and that transformation is needed. How do you in the team Timmermans try to balance these various demands? How do we make sure, how does the EU want to make sure that we don't invest in the old and wrong and dirty and dangerous things and instead direct the investment towards sustainability?
Thank you for that question. Well, actually, the entire Green Deal is precisely about that. You really look into every single economic sector, from the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the cars we drive, the energy we consume, and really try to foresee a transformational change in all these sectors, which would be within the limits of our planet, in the sense that that the science tells us. So that's the entire idea of the agenda. Now, of course, I mean, it's now almost 1 year that we have the European Green Deal. All the concrete, I would say, the narrative is right, the direction is right. There are many big strategies that have also been praised and accepted by broad European community, but of course the very concrete things that will actually deliver the change are still ahead of us. And what Ester also mentioned is the big changes to the climate legislation that will be proposed next year. And I think here also to echo what Ester said, we really need everybody's contribution and co-creation here to get this right, because yes, all the concrete measures will be still ahead of us. And maybe one example from all why I also said that the comprehensive nature is so incredibly important of the Green Deal. I'm personally very worried about the entire land use and biomass discussion. I mean, we are from every sector. We are, increasingly putting demands on our forests. We want everything to be replaced with, let's say, bio-based materials and resources. But when we then put, let's say, data together, it does not seem to be adding up. So why again the kind of circular economy, the business transformation? Simply also lowering our overall primary resource consumption is absolutely crucial also for being able to deliver on these different strands and transformational change.
Thank you very much indeed. It's not only about climate, there are also so many other environmental challenges. I would like to direct one of the questions, one of the points that was raised to you, Klaus Töpfer, if you can unmute yourself. And that is stress that the EU is a large trading partner, large economy, but it is not dominating on the world scale, and that the EU must accompany the EU Green Deal with environmental diplomacy, climate diplomacy, and make sure that the transformation actually reaches the planet. It's a call for more multilateralism, stronger international institutions. What is your response to that? What gives you hope and what gives you fear?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm unmuted. That's wonderful wording, wonderful wording. Anyhow, you see, for my feeling, this pandemic crisis, Corona crisis, has one very, very important positive by-effect. It gives us again a learning in reducing our speed. To lock down and to stay and to think is possible now. It's very difficult for people. An old philosopher from the medieval, nobody knows him, but he's a very outstanding one. He once mentioned that the most difficult topic on running is to stand still. That we have now the need to reconsider. Lots of people are now convinced, what the devil did we all have to consume? We have something like a consumerism, bulimia of consume. We have a throwaway society from the food up to what we are in our clothes and what have you. So to stay still and consider seems to be the first very important part. And I sincerely hope, looking for the United States of America, that we have now the chance to start a new way. We wouldn't have come to the change in Copenhagen without the integration of Obama in those days. And I believe the same is happening now. And it is good to learn that, for example, the British Prime Minister Johnson is now the fighter for a successful Glasgow Convention. All this gives me a little bit of feeling that there seems to be a positive consequence of this crisis. But I don't want to be too optimistic. I see it with a lot of very, very high need to be much better broadening the ideological differences we have in this world. So we have to be in a very, very close cooperation with China, whether you like it or you don't like it, but they have 1.4 billion people there. And if we cannot be handled in it, it will be very difficult. And by the way, I strongly believe that earlier or later, we in Europe have also to consider that less economic stability can increase the non-economic development structure. The subject of social structure just mentioned before. I have to criticize my little presentation this morning myself. I didn't underline enough the social consequence of all this. It is a little bit a problem that those mainly interested in those wonderful concepts we are discussing here are not directly confronted with a situation in our population where there are poor people, we cannot make their living, where the bill for the energy is a total different to other topics as well. So take it all together. I sincerely believe we have to learn to go a little bit slower, to be a little bit more linked with the question, not only, but we in Germany, we have only 2% of the global CO2 emission. What shall we do? We have to make clear that there are technologies and that there are behavioral change possible, that others can follow in this field as well, and we can learn from others. I have this little booklet, can only show it to you, from Femin Sarr, a thinker of Senegal, Afrotopia. Read it. And he say, we don't want to be little Europeans. We want to be Africans. Let us be open for cultural change, bring culture integrated in this topic. It is not social directly, but it has a lot to do with our societies. Therefore, I believe I'm far away from only seeing the negative consequences of the pandemic. As difficult it is to sit here in isolation, makes you nearly mentally ill, but you have to overcome it. You must learn to understand yourself before you can make changes in other people's mind as well. that I believe we should learn from such a discussion as well, that not everything can be handled only by reasonable reasons, but also by feelings, by emotions, by dedication to the people and bring them on board. Not, and I underline what Hans mentioned, don't make the consumers responsible, but give them the feelings that they should be aware of what others are doing and that they have to change themselves, to give the good example for everything of that. A long and not very precise answer, but I'm always looking for those experts who give me the precise answer to this question. I try to consider it, but it is a challenge we never mention enough. And this goes, by the way, to all the SDGs. If you see the SDG 2 and ask what is going on with hunger, you come in the same situation. Yes, 1 minute is a long time, but I don't want to use it. I want to give it back to you. I sent you as a gift 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Klaus. And you already mentioned Hans and what he said before the session. I think the underlining also from the other speakers, Hans, is the desire to cooperate and to learn from one another. That is one of the things that the European Environment Agency is doing, more with data and less with stories, but also with stories. Where do you see the strengths? What do you think can happen in the future when you look at the role of the European Environment Agency and the new future that is sketched out in the EU Green Deal? Hans? You're still muted.
Okay, here we are. Well, I think, first of all, that the European Green Deal is a story about the future. It is a narrative that is about the future, and it is so broad and encompassing in a society that has rather different views on where this future should be going, and that wants to put the emphasis on different things, that I think it needs to be an open narrative that engages, as Esther said, with society, doesn't speak to society, but engages with society on how the implementation of a European Green Deal can involve society, and is about stories. And stories are also about values, about what touches people. That's why we remember the stories also from when we were kids. There were lessons in them. And so I think one of the key elements, and I know that Frans Timmermans brings that message rather often, that this is not just a policy document or not just a bundling of policy initiatives. It's also something that should open a fundamental debate in and about and with society. So I think that is absolutely critical. And we did together, or based on work also done by others at the Stockholm Environment Institute, we did a mapping of the SDGs, and we mapped them against each other in a table. And it's clear that there are elements where there are trade-offs. The bio-based economy is a classic example of where you have trade-offs. As Helena said, yes, indeed, it doesn't add up if you listen to all the promises of what we will be doing with biomass, which means by definition that we will need to start talking about the logic of sufficiency and move away from the idea that whatever consumption we will have, we will cover it now by using biomass or nature-based solutions, another term that is rather naively mentioned as a panacea. So a serious analysis that is framed as an engaging debate with society and that is not scared to touch the difficult issues, I think is absolutely critical. And if I can link it very briefly, Andreas, to the questions that came our way, what are your hopes? Well, first of all, I think in line with what the title is of the conference, we need a fast and complete phasing out of any subsidies, tax breaks, or favorable policies for fossil fuels. Yeah, and I think that is embedded in the minus 55%. If we don't move away from that financial logic, we will never get there, let alone further. A second thing for me is fundamentally linking climate change objectives to biodiversity objectives. We will not get there if we don't make use of the natural carbon cycle, to which Ester referred to. Helena also hinted in that direction. It's not only about the energy system or technology for better cars, it's more encompassing. And thirdly, I think we need to pay much more attention to social inequalities. The current inequality, not only in Europe, but on globally, can never be a fertile breeding ground for long-term sustainability. And if the GDP goes up or down 1-2 percentage points, we pay a lot of attention to that, and probably for some good reasons. But when the Gini coefficient on inequality goes up 10% or goes down 10%, we hardly pay any attention to it. Well, maybe we should pay a bit more attention to that, because with an improved Gini coefficient come alongside all sorts of social benefits, which we will need to frame this story of sustainability if we want to really push it through for the 21st century. So yes, framing the story and opening a societal debate, I think, would be absolutely critical.
Thank you very much, Hans. And you mentioned that they are difficult questions, and we have the person who is responsible for difficult questions. It's our chat master, Aaron Best. He's been watching what is going on in question and answers and in the chat. And I would ask Aaron to come on, unmute yourself, show yourself on the video screen, and tell us what has been coming in the chat, in the questions and answers. What have you picked out as a summary? Aaron.
Great. Thank you, Andreas. And hello, everyone. Yes, I've been watching the chat, and this issue of social justice has come up a few times, and Hans Bruyninckx just raised it as well. One with an international perspective, Anouk from Klingendale asks, how are we going to ensure that Europe's transition is not going to transfer the burden of our transition to other regions? For example, electrifying the economy needs lithium and other minerals mined from Latin America and Africa. So there's the international aspect, and then also within the EU as well, justice as an issue. Georgios Kostakos directed a question at Helena Braun, that the European Green Deal seems more attuned to the needs of the economy for alternative growth opportunities, rather than realigning strategies and resources to ensure the well-being of all citizens. He asks, is the European Green Deal the radical, fair, and inclusive transformation that Europe and the world need?
Thank you, Aaron. And I guess that these are two good questions. Helena, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. Maybe I would start with the global one, and that is of course a challenge. I mean, one example, recently I was working quite a lot on the chemical strategy, for example, another part of the European Green Deal, and the entire, of course, the product policy side of things as well. I mean, here to ensure we know that many products enter our market, let's say, containing substances which we are not entirely sure where they come from and what exactly they are, and the tracking mechanisms and everything are not that easy. So we have to very carefully, and here we also see big possibilities to combine the green with our digital twin transition, to really also invest in innovation there, that we could also, let's say, better track that everything that enters our market from the outside is also, let's say, compatible with our internal rules, and the same, of course, goes for overall export of our footprint. At the same time, of course, when we see, I mean, oftentimes we hear, for example, in the context of food policies, being said that if we increase organic production, decrease the use of pesticides and so on, then we will basically, yes, move the food production to other parts of the world where the sustainability standards already today aren't far as high as in Europe. At the same time, well, when we closely assess these matters, we can clearly see that this is not necessarily the case, or quite far from it. I mean, we need to also take into consideration overall the the dietary shifts and preferences there. We also need to see that, I mean, food can be produced if we have fertile soils, clean water, and it doesn't just, so if we really end up in a very dire situation with those, let's say, indicators, there is little use of talking about importing or exporting pollution, and that's what's relevant to, let's say, other parts of the world too. But overall, indeed, it's just to acknowledge that definitely the global dimension is a challenging one. As you know, there are also discussions on the carbon border mechanism and many other initiatives. I mentioned the deforestation to create transparency in the supply chain and really ensure that one product is not related to these kind of negative consequences. It's certainly a challenge, but it is really an important part of the Green Deal. There is a lot of focus to that. So I can just say that yes, the problem is acknowledged, but also the solutions are actively being sought. Now, when it comes to the second question, I'm afraid you need to refresh my memory.
Aaron, that's what we have Aaron for.
The institutional memory. Yes, it's also about the concept of justice within the EU as well, not just the international element, but in terms of the breadth and scope and depth of that social justice conception.
Mm-hmm. I mean, here I can just a little bit, maybe I don't want to be repetitive, but really say that, well, that this is first of all a very important point for my boss, Frans Timmermans. The social justice angle of this entire transition is a crucial one. There are many different elements that are embedded also in the Green Deal to ensure that. It's from the most, let's say, the most spoken of is the just transition mechanism. But when we look at the skills agenda, when we look at the education agenda, maybe agendas that are not always that closely linked or that directly linked to the Green Deal in the Commission, there has been a lot of, let's say, green economic transition mainstreaming to these agendas as well. So it's absolutely a strong focus of the Commission, and there is really a full acknowledgement that that for this transition to be successful, it has to be just. And my boss also used to be the SDG coordinator responsible in the previous Commission, and also he finds that beyond the social justice questions, also the entire governance, the democracy, the rule of law, the vibrant civil society, free thought, free media, all these actually are also extremely important elements in this transition, even if they may sometimes seem a bit, let's say, not that straightforwardly linked to greening. But at the same time, well, every time we meet, for example, also our good partners from Green 10 and also Ester, well, you can maybe come in on that, but these elements are always very strongly mentioned also by them as key.
I would like to encourage everybody to be a little bit shorter and quicker and straight to the point. Having listened to all of this, Esther, if you could unmute yourself and listen to what is being promised with your agenda at the WWF. Is this enough? Is it quick enough? What else would you want?
Well, is this quick enough? We always say that this is a critical decade of action. I think we've been saying that for a while. I think Professor Töpfer mentioned that. The repetition, we used to say the advocacy is the art of being consistent. So I think, I mean, there's no more, the urgency is very clear. I think there are no more excuses now, whether it's, the urgency now is very clear. So, and I think we are acting. How quickly, maybe it's hard to assess. I think what is important is that we are bringing the different elements together, and all the speakers have mentioned that we bring, for instance, together the biodiversity element as well. And I've seen also questions about nature-based solutions, for instance. There's a lot of talk, how we make sure that this happens. in our view, for instance, would be that we have a clear legal framework, for restoration of ecosystems in the EU. How we do is with clear targets, avoiding, pitfalls like, biomass policies and so on. That we also have funding to do that, because the next financial framework, the MFF, is about to be agreed. We have targets for climate spending. We have targets for biodiversity spending from 2040 onwards. Why we don't bring forward these targets, for instance, in all the funding for the recovery post-COVID as well? But of course, there's also the private funding, and there as well, I think some of the speakers have mentioned, the Commission has done a lot of work when it comes to sustainable finance. They've been really in the driving seat of moving forward the discussion about how we mobilize private investment as well for sustainability. We have a next generation coming. That's going to be critical to define what is brown, what is green, what is an investment that works for biodiversity or marine protection. So these are the areas that I see that are still in the process of being developed, and we will be pushing as WWF. Last point maybe is also what we need to get rid of. I think Hans mentioned that, and very clearly we have to get rid of fossil fuels, for instance. This is that's a bit of a heated debate, especially in the context of the recovery post-COVID, but we cannot allow anymore to invest public money into fossil fuel structures. We are just locking ourselves in technologies that are going to be outdated, and we are just delaying this transition that's very much needed. So I hope that's fine.
Thank you very much, Esther. Hans, you've heard how the other speakers have taken up your call for avoiding investment in fossil fuels and phasing out. How do you see the knowledge basis amongst the member states? Where do you see the conflict lines, if there are any? And explicitly, what do you hope the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy can contribute to this?
Well, I think the taxonomy and the knowledge that has gone into it, and because financial markets work based on expectations also, and you can see already that the move by the European Investment Bank, for example, which is one of the lead players in that type of investment facilitation, to step out of the fossil fuel investments very soon. That was a quick and bold move. So it has impact. We also know that the Sustainable Finance Initiative in its complete package, it has a lot of interest from China, from Japan, from Korea, from Canada. So I think Europe is indeed leading when it comes to fundamentally reflecting on shifting the direction of investments. And I don't say that with naivete. I know there is a lot that needs to be done, and we're only starting to push that sector. But I think it's a really important needle on the compass that has been shifted. So that for me is absolutely critical. If you look then at how do I see knowledge shifting in support of this type of transition? Well, I think by focusing on what makes Europe Europe. Yeah, we are a mixed economy where we strongly believe that public investment in well-being and in macroeconomic sort of trajectories is important. So I'm not pleading to take that money out of the economy. I'm pleading to be very explicit on how we can use public money to step away from what is not sustainable, but equally explicit then in putting it where we want to see the change. So I think that is where Europe has a unique role to play, because that is not the North American approach, that is not the Chinese approach, that's the European approach. So linking our leadership on thinking about sustainability, low carbon, circular economy to our unique approach to an economy where public investments are really a basis for reshifting the needle on, or shifting the needle on the compass, I think that's where we can play a unique role, and where we will need knowledge to monitor that, because how do we know it's happening if we don't have a sort of integrated monitoring? And for the moment, we don't really have that. There are initiatives in that direction. They're embedded in the 8th Environment Action Programme. They're embedded in thinking about the semester. They're embedded in thinking about the dashboard for the European Green Deal, but really coming with an integrated monitoring of where we are shifting the economy and where we're shifting production and consumption, that I think would be very helpful.
Thank you very much, Hans. And yes, we always compare Europe to either the United States or the whole of North America, or to China and East Asia. Klaus Töpfer, in discussions like these, we rarely mention Africa, but it is a continent that is very close to Europe, inextricably linked with Europe in so many ways. How do you see the balance between North and South in a world that habitually thinks about the 3 poles of the Northern Hemisphere only?
Yeah, that's really a $1,000 question. And I can only underline once more what I tried to say. We combine it, I mentioned it myself, that we have something like a double dividend. But the double dividend is reduced to the European context. There we are investing. I'm a little bit afraid that 2 topics are out of the control. One was mentioned once more than once. There's a question, where are the resources coming from we need for that? I can only repeat once more. We all want to have electromobility. The mobility transition is not to change from the one type of a motor to another type of a motor. It's a question, what do we do with our mobility topics? This is also a problem with regard to our friends in the east, in our southern neighborhood in Africa. You see quite now, if you go to Africa, you see something like a leather going down. The oldest cars you ever can find in the world, you see in Africa. I think Kenya just passed a law that cars older than 10 years are not allowed to be handled any longer, because what is not used anymore is not going to a recycling process, but is going to develop there. So I believe that this is a very, very important topic to make clear that we don't want to export directly or indirectly what we have to. You remember, you know, the discussion going on with regard to a law with regard to the supply chain in Germany. It is fascinating. I tried to single out the supply chain for cobalt in the German car industry. That makes a lot of interesting implementation. There you are in the Democratic Congo. There you are in Papua New Guinea. You are all over the world. Nobody has an idea of what's going on there. Nobody wants to touch it. Because if you touch it, you have a problem because you need it and you know you cannot substitute it on a short way. I'm fairly sure if you see what's going on with water and lithium, then you come to a comparable topic. If you go to all the raw materials, you come always to developing countries. So it is a one-way direction, and I believe that is not the way we can have a stable climate policy. I'm afraid that we are happy if we say we are now climate neutral in 2050. We don't ask how are those people in Africa making their necessary development process possible with which energies. I remember one example, I had a meeting in those days with the then sitting Minister for Environment and Energy for South Africa, a wonderful lady. And she always mentioned, Klaus, you give us advice what we shall not do. We shall not use nuclear. We shall not use any kind of fossil fuels. And we are sitting on a lot of fossil fuels. And you guys, you make your economic progress just by using those fossil fuels and destroy the climate. And now you come back to us and say, don't do it, let it where it is. You didn't give us any example for that. And you recommend us with regard to renewable energy, and you are at home arguing that they are too expensive for you. It was highest time that we started exactly this as our responsibility. I remember those days when we started with solar energy, with Hermann Scheer and others, only for the Germans, yes. It was $1 per 1 kilowatt hour solar energy. Now we are at 2 cents and less. This is what we have to do in Europe, to give an example of those decentralized and open for mistakes technologies. In solar energy, you can make a mistake, but you are not destroying anything. You are not destroying whatever in the future. We learned that this is a very important criteria, and we don't accept those criteria. That makes me nervous. That makes me very nervous. And then we can come back after 1 generation or 2 and say, but they made the main mistake they made with regard to climate. They make it now with regard to the risk integrated in the new technologies. Excuse me, no 1 minute back, 1 minute more. Thank you very much for your liberal handling of all this.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Klaus Töpfer, for reminding us that this requires, the questions are complex, so it requires integrated thinking, it requires global thinking, not just forward thinking, but in that wider sense. These are complicated questions. And with that, I go back to Aaron Best, our man for all the questions in the background. Aaron, what is coming up on the chat and in the questions and answers?
Well, I'd like to raise another type of thinking, Andreas, and that is emotional thinking. This is a point that Klaus Töpfer touched on, but also we see questions from the audience about the role of feelings and emotions. That's something that policy research and mainstream economics have not dealt with enough. So what is the role of those emotions, such as fear, anger, hope, optimism? And a specific question for Klaus Töpfer then as a follow-up is, having seen so much in terms of the evolution of environmental policy, what is his view now on the Green New Deal and the role of hope in that? Does he have hope for the future? What gives him that hope?
Okay, Klaus Töpfer's camera is at the moment not on. If he comes back, yes, there he is, back again. Klaus, to you. And then I would play it to Hans Bruyninckx for the question of what are the policy lessons that we've learned in the past and what's the long-term thinking before we then go to the other panelists. Klaus.
What I always learned is be careful if you have a hype. You see, we have now a hydrogen hype. I'm very careful. Hypes are going out of the good consideration. What are the plus and minuses? I can give you a lot of examples for this. What I'm as a hope is that we at least now have an agreement on targets. But again, targets are a little bit risky because first and foremost, they are targets for the future. And we are not in line with the, let me say, the assessment. Where are we in this target? So if I want to say it in one word, I'm a realistic optimist. You know the wonderful definition of an optimist and a pessimist, saying that the pessimist is the informed optimist. And we have to be aware of this, that we are not optimists by the sake of optimism, but that we have to come, Ernst Bloch would say, to a concrete utopian, where the existing situation is leading. And this link between the targets and the leading development, this makes me a little bit nervous that this is not yet visible enough. I see a wonderful sentence, and it is wonderful to say now we are increase the targets in the European Union, knowing that those sitting quite now as the targets are not realized at all. I would be very happy if we can say the changes in the overall knowledge, in the overall consideration of the people are the basis for our optimistic view to increase the targets. That seems me to be very necessary to link the necessity with the possibilities. That is politics, to make the necessary possible and not to make the possible necessary. That's a difficult overall consideration. You know, in the German policy, you can have a good example for all of this. No, policy is not the situation of the possibility, but it makes the necessity to make the possibility realistic. That seems me to be very necessary. And this change for the better. Therefore, I'm a realistic optimist.
Thank you very much, Klaus. It reminds me of this dialogue between the pessimist and the optimist, where the pessimist says, it's so bad, it can't possibly be any worse. And the optimist replies, oh yes, it can. One of the most emotional reports that I read from the European Environment Agencies was the stories collected in a volume that was Late Lessons from Early Warnings, where the authors took case studies and looked back at what was known at a time, what was done at the time, and how they evaluate the consequences today. And it was really frustrating, emotionally frustrating reading how many of the lessons were learned so late, if at all. Hans, emotional language, as Aaron Best said, does it have a role in the work of the European topic centers and all the other working groups that are coordinated by the EEA?
Well, I would say that if you single out, or if you want to get rid of emotions, you should get rid of people altogether, huh? Because I mean, no, I mean, seriously, it's part of human existence. And I think that's important to state. But when I talk about science and knowledge, we often hear this mantra when it's applied to science in particular, that we need value-free science. Yeah, and I have to push the debate a bit there. I've often said that that's exactly what it says it is. It's science without value, value-free science. And I think the message here is, of course, we need to follow the most rigorous scientific method. Of course, we need to bring knowledge to the table as a European Environment Agency that stands the scrutiny of those who are critical of it, of those who review it, and of those who want to use it to build policy on it. But we will need strong value commitment. Do we really think we will turn the unsustainability around in the next decade and beyond without a really strong commitment to values and to have a clear sense of direction of what type of values as a society we stand for? Just transition is about values, making choices between maximizing profit or maximizing well-being is a value discussion. So I think we need the best possible science, but framed in a context where we are very much aware that we will need to make choices, and choices are often value driven. But what we know from analyzing policies is that believe science, yeah, that's the volumes you were referring to, Late Lessons from Early Warnings. They pretty much came to the conclusion that when scientists warn for consequences of the use of certain technologies, there are very few, if any, false positives. Yeah, when we now think in false positives with Corona, everybody understands there are no false positives. Yeah, so believe them, trust them. You need to act, and the sooner you act, the better for society. Targets work, clear targets and deadlines. What also works is emphasis on implementation. Implementation. It is absolutely necessary. What we have not been doing, and that's where I think the big shift is there in essence in the Green Deal, is focus on the drivers that ultimately deliver the outcomes. And that's the core systems that Helena has also mentioned. And we shouldn't be naive about the old medicine, which is called policy integration. Yeah, it didn't work in the old-fashioned way in transport. It didn't work in the CAP. It didn't work in the energy system. It didn't work. What we need is a push for a real breakthrough that sets the target where it needs to be, and not the sort of soft medicine of a little bit of policy integration without shifting the fundamentals of unsustainability. And I think that's where we have to have the tough debates. And in the food system, it's a particularly tough debate. We all know that. But if we sidestep it, we'll never get there. Yeah? So that would be my response there.
Great, thank you very much, Hans. And before I give the words to Esther to formulate what she expects from the European Commission and the Green Deal, and then Helena responds to that, let me say, Hans, that I disagree with one point, and that is, I think that the Cardiff process for integrating environmental concerns into other policies worked too well, and that is why it was stopped. It was the ministers in the other council formations that just didn't like it, and the process was defunded, so it petered out, but it was effective in its early stages.
Andreas, can I just give, I mean, we've been focusing on better engines, better combustion engines. That was policy integration. And we were very successful, but the emissions go up. We've been focusing for 20 years on integrating environment and increasingly climate measures in our food system in agriculture. And in their own, you know, little cocoon, some of them were successful. The Court of Auditors came to the conclusion that overall they were not successful. Analysts have been looking at that. The same can be said for some of the building and infrastructure requirements. So I agree with you, it's a tough debate, but I would say overall, they never went to the full and core drivers of unsustainability. And that's where we should put the attention now. And the Green Deal, in essence, has the potential to do that.
Esther.
Wow, what I would, it's very hard now to intervene. I mean, I define myself always as an outrage optimism. You know, I believe that people these days need to have a clear policies that are telling us, even if the road is going to be bumpy, even if it's going to be difficult, we will get there. And this is how we are going to get. And you are going to be part of this as well. I think what the Commission can do, I think, in addition to mobilize these clear targets, these clear policies, and push for implementation in the member states, I think can also challenge member states, as I said, in few things. One is clearly in the way policies are developed, to be much more based on science. You know, could set up, and they already exist in some member states, scientific advisory committees. I talk about the European Climate Pact, how really citizens are part of that change, because we are talking about transforming our societies. The European Commission can inspire this action that after can be trickled down, you know, at national, region, and local level. There are there are plenty of local initiatives and regional initiatives where people sit together and design policies and agree on the trade-offs, what we take and what we give up. All this can be harnessed by the Commission and can be inspiring another type of policy making. I do believe in targets as Hans, and I think that's the values of some of the European legislation, that we are clearly telling the roadmap. But then we have to make ourselves accountable for the targets. We have to implement as well. And of course, I think the third is clearly on the finance. We are talking now about mobilizing billions of public money. We need to make sure that we are going to do the right investments, especially member states are going to make the right investments. How the Commission is going to hold member states accountable for the use of the money in the national recovery plans. I think that's a question that's still to be answered. And of course, I think the Commission can also inspire member states, some member states, in the way we work with civil society and different stakeholders. I'm not saying that everything is perfect, but where I sit, I have to say that with challenges, with difficulties, and Helena will tell you, we don't always agree, but there's a dialogue between Commission, civil society, trade unions, the businesses as well. So how we also model this dialogue, you know, in the member states, and give also the chance to civil society, to science and others, you know, to present views and to engage in the discussion of policies.
Thank you very much, Esther. And to you, Helena, you have now heard so many demands and proposals and ideas. And we recognize that the European Commission is not the master of everything. Give us your sense of what member states may want to go along with and where the difficulties are, where they will resist the changes that this group is obviously demanding. Helena.
Thank you. Not the easiest question to answer. I think on certain aspects it's just a bit too early to actually tell, because many of the proposals are still to come, which will actually change, let's say, the the systems, the processes on the ground. And this is where, well, now, I mean, we are already had launched many different consultation processes. We already see, yes, I mean, sector by sector, you have many vested interests, and also, yeah, not so easy to turn things around. But then you of course have also very strong societal expectation to turn things around. So it's a bit of a battleground on every individual piece that will make a difference, and it's, I wouldn't dare to say today yet. I'm very hopeful that we will be successful, but I'm not able to say yet today what, you know, the main difficulties will be, and the main points of resistance. I can just assume that what was also now raised by Hans and others regarding the real transformational change, when we do not talk about replacing one engine with the other, but we are really talking about the systemic change, that when we start questioning the issues of ownership, when we start saying, do we need to, yes, well, ownership in a way is a good concept here, where comes with all the business, let's say business model innovation, whether we can move more towards a service-based economy where we get mobility and not necessarily each own a car, and all these questions. These are quite big questions, and we see clear generational shifts here. But in terms of really translating this into concrete policies and making member states come along, I would assume that this will be a bit of a challenge. And the first test, one of the first tests, will be next year, the product policy, the Sustainable Product Policy Initiative that the Commission will put on the table. But overall, I mean, I just fully, I can only agree with what has been said. And lastly, by Ester, there isn't really much to add to that. We are moving, let's say, for the same objectives. What we really need, I mean, indeed, the expectations to the Commission are higher than what Commission actually can deliver on its own. So we really need everybody's strong involvement, pushing us, but pushing also very strongly the other two co-legislators, the member states, clearly pronouncing what are the objectives that different stakeholders want to see fulfilled. What are the changes? I mean, I was very closely working on turning the plastics, or putting the plastics economy on a sustainable path, and we really saw how, thanks to this huge societal movement support, in the end, also from those parts of the business who actually, well, feel the effects the most, that, yeah, certain what were considered tiny bit revolutionary changes were possible, but they wouldn't have been possible if it was just, let's say, Commission putting a proposal on the table. There was a huge societal demand and inclusion, and that made things move fast. So I hope that this can be reciprocated in many occasions now, when we come to very concrete changes that the Green Deal promises to deliver on.
Great, thank you very much. I think we hear between the lines of your very diplomatic and carefully worded answer the tensions that we can expect between the Commission and various member states over some of the issues in the future. Now, scanning over the chat and the questions and answers, it's absolutely amazing how detailed some of the comments are addressing individual directives or regulations. Aaron, you look at this with more of a keen eye than I can here. What are the key points that have arisen in the last 20 minutes or so?
Thanks, Andreas. One of the topics that's come up relates to mobilization, the politics of the issues. On the one hand, mobilization being getting going. And one question from Andrea Kohl to Ester Asin is, what is the role of NGOs in the mobilization of civil society? How can they best be supported? And what do they need to improve in order to have bigger impact? And a related question, but also about mobilization, is dealing with the blocking forces. Mobilizing by getting rid of those things, stopping the movement. And has there been enough attention given to addressing these blocking forces. And you know, the 70 million Trump supporters were mentioned. They have many, many peers in Europe and other parts of the world. How do we take them along on the green agenda?
Helena, that's back to you. Sorry, Esther. Sorry, Esther.
Well, I'm very, very happy to take a question from Andrea Cole, who you might know was my predecessor. So I hope she believes that, you know, I'm taking, you know, the role in a good way. How we NGOs, I mean, some of the things that we can do differently. If I also think about my own organization, WWF has an amazing base of supporters. This is people who give us money, you know, on monthly basis, who volunteer for us, who support us, who sign petitions. I think the way we talk to our supporters also needs to evolve, because it's not that we want them because, you know, we want their money, because we know that they are really agents of change. They have the potential of coming together, and we can create those platforms and those spaces. I think this is one of the first things, and I think we are learning. We are learning in WWF with many successful, especially campaigns that have been led by EPO in the past, by our European network as well. I think the second is unusual coalitions. Unusual coalitions and getting rid sometimes of the logos, you know, not thinking about the visibility of our organizations, but how we can achieve the greatest impact. And how? Well, very often is the numbers. The numbers do matter. If, as we've done now, we've put together with more than 100 organizations an amazing campaign together for forests. Thanks to other campaigning platforms, we've reached 1 million people contributing to the commission consultation. It's one of the largest ever. And it's not WWF of the Greenpeace, it's really the Together for Forest movement. So the movement building also is something that will help us also to make a bigger impact. And the third would be, as I said, getting out of a comfort zone. In this talk, we've also talked a lot, for instance, about social issues, inequalities. I think the environmental movement needs to also, you know, get much closer to the social movement, and understanding that, you know, the green and the social going hand in hand together. We will never succeed if, you know, more people are left behind. That's not possible. On the other hand, as Andrea says as well, we cannot negotiate with nature. We don't have time. So how we also break those silos and get off our comfort zone, I think that for us is going to be key in the coming year. So I hope, Andrea, I've answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Mobilizing civil society and mobilizing consumers to change their behavior is one thing. Mobilizing business, Klaus Töpfer, and getting them to become effective agents of change and supporters of progressive policies is something that you have a lot of experience with. Could you share that with us in about 1 or 2 minutes?
Always a restriction with time. Thank you very much. You see, only to bring it on a point, we changed the market economy to a social market economy. The drivers was mainly the trade unions. The NGOs, in my eyes, are the trade unions bring the social economy to the ecological social economy. They are the drivers, they bring the people. I'm always a little bit concerned with the wording, we should. One of the good philosophers, Zygmunt Bauman, once mentioned, we, that means collective irresponsibility. Who is we? We are always interested in we, and therefore we have to go to the different parts. Go back to the car industry. It is absolutely necessary to see that this is the disruptive technology I mentioned in my presentation. Who is going on with the traditional technology of a motor will go out of the market. So they change. And they are the drivers of change. By the way, they are even fighting between the different technologies, e-mobility, e-fuels, gas, fuel cell. That's wonderful that we have something like a broadening of the technology. See, it is never good to have all eggs in one basket. That's a proverb, I think, coming from the United Kingdom. And there are lots of good things in the United Kingdom beyond the Brexit. Therefore, yes, the industry, the economy will be to the utmost interested to have new fields for development. A new technology gives a new perspective for newcomers, for really active economic structure, and integrate the ecological topic in this, therefore ecological and social market economy. I'm a little bit disappointed that in the Green Deal, nobody mentioning the system structure, that we have to go in this direction. We will discuss what is the role of capitalism in the future, a very important part. And I believe that it is a little bit limited that we believe we can single out those questions of our discussion here. This is in the center of our discussion as well as it is the social side. Excuse me, it was again too long, but I'm so seldom with you, my good friend, so I try to use my best to use my time. I have things.
We should have you more often. Hans Bruyninckx, any additions to these comments before Helena Braun responds what that might mean for the further development and implementation of the EU Green Deal? You're still muted. You need to unmute.
Yeah, okay, good. I do agree with Ester and Helena and Klaus that embedding what we have built up, which I think is the most amazing socio-economic political realization of modernity, which is, you could say, what was then the Northwestern European welfare state model, where we reflect certain values in how the structure of the economy interacts with societal actors, the tripartite model, but also with a bunch of core objectives of equality and opportunity. I think that is really still at the core of the European discussion, I think. And so connecting with social movements and with organizations that have played a big role there and getting them on board is really important. In these types of debates, it's always amazing to me that we rarely see the workers' movement involved. Yeah. We have these discussions in the abstract, but when it becomes concrete, it's less explicit. And another thing is that I disagree with somebody in the chat that says that social model or European economic model is gone. Not when you look at taxes. In the European economy, 40 to 50% of the GDP annually is gathered through taxes of various types and reinvested in society. That's a lot of money every year. So giving that a specific sense of direction that is in line with the Green Deal, for example, and with societal objectives is still a formidable force in the economy. So I think reflecting that much more strongly in that socio-economic connection to sustainability will be critical in the future.
Great. Esther, Helena, for a quick response.
I think it's true that it remains theoretical, but that's what we've all been saying about the social dimension, because ultimately the lives of people and workers will be impacted by the change on those policies. And people wonder whether I'm going to keep my job. Do I need to be retrained to do other jobs? So I agree. And that's what I said in my call, that we need also this social dimension, and we bridge between the two. And we need to make clear that it's not about a choice. I mean, between green or social, is actually the two together, and how we do it. And there are plenty of examples where we know that, again, restoring nature is going to create jobs, and quality jobs. So I agree that I think we need more in this debate, the social dimension coming in. And we know also that the trade unions, they've been very active as well in climate action. So, and we are, as I said, in WWF, we are trying also to bridge slowly, to the development NGOs as well, to the humanitarian sector. So to really broaden the base of our conversation.
Helena?
Thank you. Well, I can really just agree with what has been said, and I think maybe to add that it's not only environmental and social, but also economic. I think we still have some effort to do to really bridge this gap, as if we, let's say, environmental action starting from nature protection and restoration to really concrete sectorial changes, as if it was somehow anti-business, and why it's also the Green Deal really presented as the new growth strategy. And it's, I mean, we have also, especially when it comes, we had extensive debates on that in the development of the EU biodiversity strategy, for example, when we look what kind of impact, for example, protecting 30% of not only EU but world's lands and seas could actually have to our resources, and it's immensely positive, and we have very clear scientific evidence to back this up, taking fisheries and no-take zones, for example. But at the same time, to really make this, let's say, this message come through, and even though there are numbers, the case is clear and so on, but still to make it come through, and make also the most directly involved business stakeholders understand that actually these are the measures which are very strongly in their interest and in the interest of sustainability of their business, that these today are not yet coming through that well. And why I think this point that Ester made on unusual collisions is also very important, and that's what we are really trying to do. We have on different sectors strong dialogues with all the different parts of the supply chain, but also academics, NGO representatives brought all around the table to really also understand each other's concerns and try to co-create policies in that sense. And it's the same that we do, for example, within our own institution. I mean, in both cases, there is still room for development, but to really bring the traditionally, let's say, siloed parts of the house around the table and co-create a certain proposal. I think, yes, I mean, the direction is clear. It clearly has benefits for having a good outcome. And I think it's very important that this kind of approach would also be increasingly translated in the member states level, but also regional and local levels. And there are, yes, certain member states who are very advanced in that, others who are less, and we can also clearly see that being translated, for example, in the Council discussions, the discussions in the European Parliament. So yeah, these few thoughts.
Thank you very much. For a final question to Aaron Best, and then we have one round before I close this panel discussion. Aaron.
Yeah, just one last question here about societal change, and how do we prepare society for the level of change and transformation that's required? And I'd add to that, in the context of COVID-19 especially, how has the pandemic crisis acted as maybe a help and an obstacle to being ready for that level of change and transformation?
Thank you, Aaron. Let's go and start perhaps with Klaus Töpfer and end with Helena. The question, given the new urgency, but also the resources that were mobilized by the COVID pandemic or as a result of the COVID pandemic, what are the things, two specifics, what we should do and what we should stop doing? One positive, one negative. And for Helena, for you, it's slightly different. What are the things that you hope the European Commission can achieve with the Green Deal, and what do you want to avoid? But the first one to go is Klaus Töpfer.
Yes, thank you very much. I came to an end with my presentation quoting Paul Crutzen in his wonderful little article in Nature. He comes to the conclusion, unless there is a global catastrophe, a meteorite impact, a world war, or a pandemic, in the year 2002, he comes to the conclusion men will be the dominating factor in the world. And I believe we have to do our utmost to decrease the tremendous pressure on change without thinking the consequences of change. And this is, for my feeling, much more important than to increase targets, but to increase the reality and the necessity of change. How to do it, how to be aware that mankind is responsible for that, for the future even more than now. And therefore, the Green Deal is great. It was necessary to have it, but it should be a little bit more integrated in the reality of life, in bringing other people in this boat, not as the actors, but of those backing others to act in this direction. Therefore, I hope that also this conference, and especially the work of the think tanks sitting all around Europe now, quite together and to listen, hopefully with some advantage on our discussion, can contribute to this change with a very clear message to the people, not only to the governments.
Thank you. Ester?
Can you repeat again? What for me was my wishes, or what I'm asking? We're asking. Sorry, we're asking to the
If you can ask for one thing that the European Green Deal should achieve and one thing that it should stop or avoid.
Okay, one thing. Well, it sounds a bit as a slogan, but I don't have a lot of time. I want that the European Green Deal lead us to a greener and healthier and fairer future for every single European citizen and also for the rest of the world. Stop doing subsidizing fossil fuels. Thank you.
It's much easier to be specific on the negative, it appears. Hans, what are your strongest points?
Well, since we are in a pivotal decade and we know that binding policies work, I think the Green Deal should have binding targets on all the policy elements of the Green Deal in line with our best scientific knowledge, because that's what we need to bend the trends. And what we should stop doing is unsustainable subsidies of any type, whether it is in the energy system, the food system, or the resource use system. Stop.
Hans, what are the most important policy areas where you want to see that subsidy reform?
Energy and the food system.
Okay, that's nice, specific, and we have working groups working on that as this conference moves forward. Helena, you heard all that. The expectations are mounting, but you also have literally trillions of euros at the disposal when we add to the EU Green Deal also the Resilience and Recovery Fund and the other instruments. So what can you promise? What will you achieve? And what will you stop?
Mm-hmm. If those trillions were in my hand, yes, well, I think what was outlined by other panelists, I mean, this is precisely what we also want. And if I have to say what we don't want is failure. What we don't want is that we have set a very positive agenda and then we have nothing to show for it, and that will actually, in the end, risk to do more harm than good if it ends up in a increased, let's say, breaking the promises and greenwashing type of exercise. But I think this will not be the case. And the vision is really to bring Europe to a modern, well, I think modern, resource efficient and competitive economy that we have already set out in the Green Deal, but where we would have no net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and where we would decouple our growth from resource use. So, and do it in a fair and just way, and precisely also what Ester said, to have a healthier and fairer future for all people and inspire, of course, also the world to follow that. What I personally also very much hope, and which is of course also embedded in the Green Deal, is and I would pick on one of the points that you Andreas said. You said that it's not only about climate, it is about broader environmental challenges. And I would very much hope that the Green Deal helps us as the Commission, also the outside community, the member states, the European Parliament, also the NGO community, actually, to understand that and to start integrating that thinking in their, let's say, agendas, that we are talking about the two sides of the same coin. We are not talking about climate and other environmental challenges. We have today in our hand sufficient amount of scientific knowledge to also see that nature is one of our best, if not the best ally in the fight against climate change. If we choose certain solutions, for example, energy, which are very destructive from ecosystem perspective, we haven't solved anything. So to really have this integrated approach embedded, I think this is my big personal wish. And of course, now, as you precisely said, we have, let's say, trillions to spend. The Commission has clearly said that well, has put forward a green transition proposal out of this crisis. The member states and the parliament have found a preliminary agreement towards that direction. And now, of course, it's up to, again, the concrete plans as the devil is in the detail. And whereas overall, I really don't think that this crisis has brought anything positive. When people, it has brought a lot of suffering. It has stopped also greening progress in many of the areas. And I think the positives that we see from decreased pollution and so on, the cost is too high, and these are not, we haven't achieved those, let's say, sustainably in a durable manner. But certainly we do have a momentum at the moment with this recovery to use the billions in our hands in a smart way that would really take us to the economy of the future, and not back to the 20th century economy. So yes, this is what I would end up on.
Thank you, Helena. And you can be sure that amongst the panelists and participants are many people who will be constructively but also critically shadowing the work of the European Commission and the governments in the member states as we move forward. This brings us to the end of this session. We're slightly over time already. Thank you. You were actually fabulous panelists for this initial opening round. And I also want to thank not only you, but also all the participants that wrote in questions, and Aaron, who brought them to us at various times. Now, after this discussion in the panel, it is time to network and exchange ideas. I trust when I'm finished, you will get yourself a cup of tea or a glass of something. We will have a number of rooms. You can join the discussions on Whova, which is the envelope over Zoom that we're using here, by visiting the Meets Up and Virtual Meets in the community section. So in Whova, go to community, and then there you have the meetups and virtual meets. And we have established 5 virtual rooms for you to join with other participants of this event to take forward the discussion. The first one is Picnic on Grand Place in Brussels, which is about agricultural policy and food and nutrition. Then there is Tea Time at Buckingham Palace, which is about the future of the European Union and what the near-death experience of the Brexit has taught us. You can also go for a dinner on the Berlin Television Tower, where it is about digitalization and what is the future of digital technology in democracy and sustainability. You can do a bike tour around Nijhoorn Harbor in Copenhagen and discuss issues of mobility and whether better engines are the solution or different ideas, different concepts of mobility. Or you can take an evening cruise on the Seine in Paris, where you can mix with various peoples and discuss anything that you like. When you do, please make sure that Whova has access to your camera and your microphone, otherwise it doesn't work. And the rooms will open at 4 o'clock precisely in Brussels or Berlin. That is in 14 minutes or 12 minutes. Tomorrow, and that is very important, tomorrow we continue. This is not the end of the world, this is the beginning of the discussion. We start our first round of breakout groups tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning. The second round of breakout groups will then start at 1300 hours, 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Berlin or Brussels. And again, you can access all these various breakout rooms through the Whova website under Agenda. So you go to Agenda and there you find the various breakout rooms. Please only join those sessions that you have signed up for. There is a limitation, a technical limitation, and it makes it easier for everybody. Our final plenary panel will then be from 3:15 to 4:45 in the afternoon tomorrow, followed by another networking session like the one that I sketched for later on today. As background materials, there are conference papers. They can be downloaded in the document section under resources. And these papers will be the basis for the discussion in the breakout sessions tomorrow. But now enjoy the networking in the meets and meetups and virtual meets under the community. Keep up the tweeting on Twitter, think of the hashtag, and have a cup of coffee and enjoy. Thank you very much for being here now, and hope to see you later on in one of the breakout rooms or tomorrow. Bye-bye.